Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today to talk about Brothers in Arms. Not the Dire Straits album. I'm sorry, if you're a Dire Straits fan and you thought that's what I was talking about, we're not. We're talking about a video game. My apologies, go back to the YouTube search. For those of you guys who do know what Brothers in Arms is, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. I've really been wanting to highlight the Brothers in Arms franchise for over 2 years now. Honestly, it's been a video idea in my head for over 2 years. It's crazy to think that I can actually remember that it's been that long since I originally wanted to do a discussion on this franchise. Specifically, I wanted to talk about why I think it's so freaking amazing and why nothing has really come close since then. Brothers in Arms, you know, as a franchise as a whole, has just been an incredible World War II first-person shooter experience, and in my opinion, one of the greats. Like, one of the greats. And the fact that more people haven't played it always makes me sad. Like, when I see younger generations who just weren't around for the original release or didn't know what Hell's Highway was, I'm always like, dude, go back, play it. All three of them are on PC at this point, and they are all worth playing. Not just for the story and the characters, but for the gameplay mechanics. So I really wanted to sit down, talk about why I've always felt the franchise was so special. Something that, you know, is either going to make sense to you if you've already played the franchise, or something that's going to be a first-time experience for you if you've never even heard of these games or never laid a hand on them. And at the end, I think we're gonna pray a little bit to the video game gods that someone brings back this style of first-person shooter. So I guess that's the first place we should start. I mean, I very much want to talk about how beautiful Hell's Highway is, which is the footage that you're seeing here. This game came out in 2008. The first entry in the Brothers in Arms series, which was Hell 30, came out back in 2005. So the first two games, Hell 30 and Earn in Blood, both released on the Xbox 360. I'm sorry, the original Xbox, the PlayStation 2, and the PC. Hell's Highway was the first one, and also an early entry onto the Xbox 360, which was a fresh next-generation platform at the time, as well as the PlayStation 3. I should mention that. Sorry, Xbox brain over here. So it was a big jump in technology for Gearbox, and that's, you know, in my opinion, why this game still looks so freaking beautiful. Honestly, I always just loved the attention to detail that Gearbox had. There's just a hell of a lot of detail when you look at the characters, when you look at Matt Baker, when you go third person and take cover. So much detail in his uniform and in his gear, something that I feel is often neglected in World War II first-person shooters. In first-person shooters in general, especially of that time period, I always felt there was a lot of neglect to the character model because you were in first person, so no one felt like it mattered. But Gearbox was like, yeah, we go third person and cover, not to mention the sort of just the closeness, the rawness that you have of being right next to your fire teams in these smaller, you know, more methodical, strategy-focused firefights. But one of the things visually, I think, that impressed me most with Gearbox's games, with Brothers in Arms, was always the color palette. Gearbox never was afraid to recognize, like, hey, this is the European theater. We're in Germany. We're in France. This is beautiful, stunning, green countryside. We need to portray that. We need to have this color palette. And frankly, Hell's Highway came at a time when Next Generation was dark and dreary. Gears of War. You know, like, that was Next Gen for some reason. Like, yeah, real dark and gritty, and look at the lighting effects we got on this water, this wetness. It was disgusting. But Gearbox, like, you know, stood out as someone who was like, no. There's no dark and dreary in the countryside of France or Germany. There's a lot of green. We know. We've been there. And they nailed that. And it meant that even when everything was going wrong, like, you just killed everyone in your assault team, your best friends, people that you've developed emotional relationships through the storytelling. You killed them because you made one wrong move and you didn't suppress, you know, that MG nest at the other side of the field. You were still just kind of always in awe as to how beautiful everything looked. So moving off that, let's talk about gameplay, where we really should have started, actually, until I got sidetracked, because this is where BIA stands out from just about any other World War II first-person shooter out there. Frankly, it fits into a very small category of what I like to call strategic first-person shooters. So put it next to Ghost Recon, you know, Advanced Warfighter most specifically, Rainbow Six pretty much since day one up to Vegas 2, and probably a handful of other games out there. Full Spectrum Warrior. Not many at all. And what I mean by strategic FPS in the case of Brothers in Arms is that it's not just about you shooting everyone on your own. You're not Matt Baker, you know, the German killing madman. No, you're Matt Baker, leader of, you know, multiple fire teams who have a lot of work to do if they want to actually win this war. And the main focus of BIA's combat system was controlling one or multiple fire teams, actually being able to put them where you want, telling them when to move, where, how to move, and then using them to suppress the enemy. So you're seeing on screen right now, if you guys aren't familiar with BIA games, red circles above all of the enemy positions. Now, if those circles turn gray, the enemy is coming suppressed, which means they are less likely to return fire. This, of course, is the opportune time to move your squad or to advance as an individual. That's what BIA has always been about. In fact, in the early days, going back to Hill 30 and Well Earned in Blood, first-person shooting as an individual as Matt Baker was so horrendously inaccurate, you were essentially being forced to make use of those fire teams. Now, that's something they've still done in Hell's Highway, but admittedly, they gave the player a little bit more control and accuracy over firing their weapon. But they wanted to make sure that it was never about the individual, that the player could never go in and just iron sight headshot all of the Germans behind a wall, because that's not the point of the game, and that doesn't really match what they were going for, which was an element of authenticity as to how they actually fought firefights back in World War II. Now let's do a little bit of a segue away from the gameplay mechanics, because I want to get a little bit personal here. I think Brothers in Arms, for me, as a game and as developers go, you know, Gearbox and Randy Pitchford, was one of the first games where I actually was able to sit down. I mean, this was a time when this was becoming a thing, and like hear a developer talk about their game and what they're doing with it as it was being developed. This is, you know, some of us, I think, forget that this was a thing that didn't actually happen. Like, you read magazines, you know, and you followed their articles, but it was very rare to like hear a developer talk about their game. And in the case of Gearbox, Randy Pitchford would sit down with Colonel John Ansall, which was their historical supervisor, you know, someone who was helping them nail that sense of authenticity in the combat, and also in, you know, how the airborne actually engaged and used their tactics. And they would sit down together and they would talk about the game. They'd talk about the suppression system and, you know, the squad control mechanics. They talk about the situational awareness tool. You know, they would actually sit down and talk about these things, right? It's crazy to say that because it sounds so commonplace today. Like, oh yeah, developers sit down all the time and talk about their games. They didn't back then. And that created very much for me, like, one of the first bonds I ever had with, like, wow, that's the guy who's, like, working on this game. Like, that's, you know, Colonel John Ansall. Like, I didn't even have to look that name up. I kid you not. I did not have to look that. I just remembered it. Like, you just don't forget someone like that who is so genuine and sits down with a developer and talks about their game. Like, it was a really special experience for me, tied into what became a very special franchise for me. And I think this is the point in time where we need to talk a little about the story and the characters, which are something for me that are just very important. There are a few games for me that I can sit down, I could probably count them on, you know, one or two hands, where it's really hard to portray to people. You know, when I have a discussion like this with you guys, or I talk with a friend or someone, or, you know, a coworker about why I felt the game was so special, sometimes you're just at a loss for words. You're like, I don't know. Like, it's a real personal thing for me. You know, I can sit here, I can tell you about the mechanics, I can tell you straightforward what they did with the characters and how they introduced them, but it's hard for me to really explain why I was so attached to them. But that was always BIA from day one. You know, it wasn't trying to tell the story of one individual. This isn't just about Matt Baker, who happens to be, you know, the squad leader, the fire team leader of this specific group of the airborne. It's about all of the characters. It's about all the members of his fire team. It's about Red Hartstock, the leader of the other fire team. You know, all the guys under the same platoon, essentially, the same fire team, the same group of squads. It's about, you know, it's about him. It's about Sam Corian. It's about, like, Leggett. It's all of these characters, a dozen or more characters that you're introduced to throughout the course of this franchise, of this, you know, of this story, which spans 3 games at this point, and it still hasn't been finished. Hell's Highway was actually left on a cliffhanger. I mean, how many games can you point out that can even manage to give the player an emotional connection to one, you know, to more than one character? Like, that's an incredibly difficult thing to do from a storytelling perspective. Now, there's no doubt there's a bit of cheating, I guess you could say, going on, because it's World War II. there's a lot of history, and I think history definitely is a big influencer when you're telling a story. It helps you become more involved with characters because you look back and you say to yourself, like, this could potentially have happened. There could have been a group of people, a group of soldiers, members of the airborne just like this. They could have fought in firefights just like this. And for the most part, Gearbox has always aimed for that sense of authenticity in the missions, in the locations, and the events that Brothers in Arms follows along with. Up into Hell's Highway, where Hell's Highway was actually a real operation in World War II that aimed to end the war that failed, actually. I won't say what happened in Hell's Highway in case you actually play it. Just know the whole thing ends on a cliffhanger anyways. But for me, like I said, I was just so hooked on these characters. I don't know if many of you guys got into Band of Brothers when that was on television, but I did big time. I bought the box set and everything. And that was based on real soldiers who fought in World War II. And I think I had that same feeling, that same attachment that I had when I watched Band of Brothers that I did with Brothers in Arms, And for me, it's always been like two different, sources of media, forms of media that managed to really get me emotionally involved with a large amount of characters. One, based more in reality, and one, completely fictional. That's pretty special that Brothers in Arms is able to fit alongside of something that essentially tells the story of real men. When it is merely giving you some fictional characters that in your head you can consider, okay, maybe they existed, but, never once does Gearbox say, based on true events, these were real men. No, it's a group of dudes they made up for the sake of telling a story. But somehow, there's still that insane level of emotional attachment. And I think one of the things Gearbox managed to do for me personally anyways, when it comes to Matt Baker, the character you play as, is I always very much felt like I was Matt Baker. It's what Hideo Kojima talks about when he talks about Metal Gear. What he wanted to do with MGS5 was, yes, this is Big Boss, this is, Solid Snake, all of the different variants of the characters you played over the many, many years that Metal Gear Solid was around. But Hideo always talked about, yeah, they're characters, I want to voice them, I want to have them, talk and be portrayed on the screen, but I want to give the player enough control in one form or another where they feel like they are that character. They've become that character. I feel they definitely did that with Metal Gear Solid 5, and I feel Gearbox did that with Brothers in Arms from day one with Matt Baker for me. No doubt, this is his story, they're telling a story, but I am Matt Baker. I am sending these men out into battle, and I think that's where one of the biggest elements of this shines through for me. One of the reasons that I do feel that this actually happened was because while you don't actually get to change the story or the path of the story, if you mess up in combat and a whole group of your fire team dies, yeah, it's like you killed them. They're dead. That's, And actually, Brothers in Arms doesn't, actually kill these guys. They don't die. They still come back. They still exist in the story until they're killed off. But there's just something so significant about having a small, tight-knit group of squads and fire teams and then sending, 3 or 4 guys to their death because you didn't bother to suppress that MG nest at the top of that tower. So that always did it for me. That really genuinely did. And like I said, history has a big part in why I love Brothers in Arms so much. But, that can be said for any World War II shooter, yet this one has always stood out the most to me. It's an unmatched or unbeaten emotional connection to the characters and their story, one that has never existed for me in Call of Duty. As much as I loved the original Call of Duty and Medal of Honor and Call of Duty 2, I never felt that attachment to the characters or what they were doing. It was just always a forward shooting gallery. Call of Duty, for me, was all about the history. I loved the history that was shining through in those games. Same thing with Medal of Honor. But it just didn't have the full package like BIA does and like BIA had. And like I said, to me, nothing really comes close to what Gearbox did with Brothers in Arms to this day. Nothing. Nothing comes close. I mean, there's nothing else to say. It's hard to portray, as I said, to portray my feelings for a game to other people. I try to talk about it objectively as I can. Here's the mechanics, here's what made it special. And I think you guys see that, right? Games don't do these things anymore. First-person shooters don't really employ these sorts of mechanics that often anymore. This is, I would say, one of a few games in what is essentially a dead genre, and that kind of upsets me. I would love to see that sort of strategic first-person shooter make a return. And I very much hope that one of the first games to make that return is the next entry in the Brothers in Arms series. Now, Gearbox has actually said just last year that they are still working on it. In fact, it's in its very early stages. That excites me, because what they originally announced for a sequel was what they were calling Brothers in Arms Furious 4. Or Furious 5, something like that. It was a completely different direction, completely different art style, completely different set of characters. They recognized, like, whoa, how can we do this to the fans? There are people who are genuinely tied to Matt Baker and his story, and we left them on a cliffhanger. And this isn't really a game that fits with what Brothers in Arms is, the tone of the franchise. It was going to be a much more wild type experience. As far as I know, that ended up getting canned and turned essentially into Battleborn. Now, Gearbox has said, Randy Pitchford himself has said, yes, we are working on the next entry in the Brothers in Arms. It's in its very early states, and we're not looking to share anything. I was actually fortunate enough to get a direct response from the man himself. Just yesterday, I shot him a tweet and was like, dude, what's going on with Matt Baker? Brothers in Arms, you know, is such a magical game for me still. And he simply replied, we're working on it, but there's nothing to share just yet. So I'm hopeful to see the return of this franchise. Honestly, if you're sitting there and you have no idea what these games are, you never played them, like I said, they're all available on Steam going back to Hill 30, Earned in Blood, and Hell's Highway. Those are the 3 you want to play. Those are the Matt Baker story. Do yourself a favor, pick them up, start with Hill 30, play it. Move on to Earned in Blood, play it. Move on to Hell's Highway, play it. Like, you will become involved. It's not just the gameplay, it's the story, it's the music, it's the characters, it's the setting, it's the wonderful color palette. It's all of these components that make Brothers in Arms, in my opinion, one of the best World War II first-person shooters. One of the best World War II shooters ever. That's it for me, guys. I got to spend a day getting really emotional about a franchise that I thoroughly enjoy and, in many ways, love. If you guys have your own thoughts on Brothers in Arms, I would absolutely love to hear them. If you're somebody who played this franchise growing up, I know Lone Wolf and I were talking about it yesterday. We were also talking about Ghost Recon. You know, definitely share your thoughts. Share your connection to the game. And if there's another game out there in the World War II genre, it doesn't have to have the same strategic elements as Brothers in Arms did. I would still like to hear why you enjoyed it. If you know you have a sort of all-time favorite World War II shooter, let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know why you enjoy it so much, what elements of it make it special for you. Let me know. That's it, guys. Fingers crossed for future Brothers in Arms news. I doubt it's going to happen anytime this year, and I would hope to see it go the way of the Dodo. This whole idea as a whole, the strategic FPS. Let's bring it back at some point. And I'm also very much okay with the return of the World War II shooter, as I talked about when we talked about Battlefield 5 potentially being in World War I. Anything else from you guys? Throw it down in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next one.
Before he died was a huge loss. We don't have time for your shit.